Empiezo prácticamente. Bueno, pues vamos a proseguir.
So we're going to resume after having awakened with a lot of humanity and transparency in this, with this need of the awareness of thought and the need of thinking. And now, in this round table, in this edition, we are going to bring you to those other places for other perspectives of seeing the world. And the three participants in this round table have very different universes, very special. They have different disciplines, they work in different fields, and I believe that together they're going to create this, like in this image of the sea that we've got with us this year, will give us a lot of information about the future. So Gao Bo, Belén Gopegui and Pascale Obolo are here with us. Thank you very much for being here and welcome. Gao Bo, you can take the floor first to tell us about your universe. Thank you.
我讲个故事，我不知道是真的是假的，但是呢，我觉得是真的。曾经在一个舞台，阿里贝尔加缪让他的灯光师给一束黑色的光，灯光师这个时候不知道怎么样的投一束黑色的光。
I know that today there is no one interpreting for you. You see? I feel alone. It's the loneliness. Camus talked about it so much. So now I'm going into this side, the loneliness, and I'm going to translate what I just said. It's perhaps true or perhaps not. My impression is that it was true. I said, I was of course thanking the organizers for having invited me to this gathering, and I was telling that once on stage Camus asked the person in charge of lights to give him a beam of black light on him. And the technician said, well, the black light you asked for, I don't have any. Perhaps you have that kind of light. How can I give you a beam of black light? And well, this is just a story I wanted to tell you about. And now I'm going to talk about something more serious. I'm still searching for a language in my life. I've always tried to find a fair language, but not only a language. So I've carried out many efforts to practice French as a foreign language. But for me, it's also my language. Even though I'm not perfect in my French, but I feel very comfortable speaking this foreign language. I think another topic of Samuel Odd, but not Samuel Pickett, but by Camus.
Qu'est-ce que je peux vous dire?
So what could I tell you about? Oh yes.
C'est bon.
Yes, it's good here.
Je voulais vous partager
I wanted to share with you
un de mes souvenirs
one of my memories from my childhood.
Je vais lire
And at the same time,
un petit texte
I'm going to read
que
a text
je l'ai écrit ou je
that
l'ai noté à l'époque.
I wrote at the time.
J'ai même donné un titre qui s'appelle Dualité.
I have a title for it,
Dans mon
Duality.
enfance, la frontière
And
entre le noir
during
et
my
le blanc
childhood,
était bien nette.
the
Ma première éducation
the frontier,
a
the
été
barrier between
celle
black
des
and
années
white
les
was
plus
very
brillantes,
clear.
c'est-à-dire
And
de la
during
révolution culturelle.
we had the cultural revolution
À
during
cette
my
époque-là,
first childhood.
dans ma petite
And during that time, in my small
Une
village,
exécution était un moment.
an execution was a very important
Nous
moment.
étions tous
We were
réunis
all
dans
we all
un
gathered
jardin public.
in a public garden.
Les condamnés
Those
grimpaient
condemned
d'abord sur
would
une scène, comme ici,
go on a stage
où
like here,
il était
and
critiqué, puis placé
that
dans
the
un camion,
condemned person was criticized, and then
Il
put
défile
him into a
dans
truck.
les rues, en
They
caravane.
put them into a truck.
Cela
There would be
Arrive 2-3 fois par an.
a
Je
caravan
m'en souviens bien.
and the
J'avais
trucks going around the
7
town. I was
et 9
between 7 and 9 years old, and
Dès que
this
j'avais-
would take place 3 or 4 times a year.
Dès que
And
je savais
as
une
soon as
exécution
I
à
knew
venir,
an
cela
execution
m'a
was to
faisait
come,
bien
that
plaisir d'y participer.
made me very happy
Du
to
début
participate
à la fin.
from the beginning to the end.
Je suivais
I
le
followed
défilé en courant. J'aimais voir
the
fusils
trucks, I followed
pointés
the
vers
parade,
les condamnés.
and I liked to see
la balle
the
entre dans leur tête et voir le cerveau sortir.
rifles
Je restais près des corps.
shooting the condemned people into their heads. I stayed close to the bodies,
cela
and
m'a
the
donné
flies
envie
would
de
come
vomir.
to eat after several hours, and that
Ce n'était pas
gave me the
grave.
nausea.
Le plaisir
It made me want to
était plus
vomit,
fort que
but
la
it wasn't
répugnance.
that bad
Je
for
me
me.
souviens encore de
My pleasure was
nom
greater
de
than
certains condamnés,
the repugnance I felt.
Montaigne et Limouyo.
Tacom and
Cela
Limouton were my friends,
Rassure, parce que d'un côté,
and
il y avait les bons,
I could see that
et
the
de
executions
l'autre côté, il y avait
made
les mauvais.
me feel that there were the good guys and the bad guys,
Et les
the
contre-révolutionnaires.
revolutionaries and counter-revolutionaries.
Mon professeur nous disait à l'école,
My
nous se débarrassons
sister said
du
at
mauvais
school,
comme le vent d'automne,
we are getting
balayer les feuilles mortes.
rid of
Sans
the evil,
Pour les bons,
just like the
il y a
autumn
le
wind
vent
will
du
take the leaves from the
réchauffe
trees
la
away.
nature.
For the good ones,
Le
we
fait
will
d'être
have
un
the
homme ou une femme
spring
n'était pas
warming
important.
up
Plus tard, j'essayais
later on.
d'être un homme.
It didn't really matter whether
on
you were a
essayait
man or a woman,
d'apprendre
and I wanted
et
tried to
comprendre
become a
les
man, and we
À ce
wanted and
moment-là,
tried to understand
j'ai réfléchi
women.
à ce que
And
nous
at the
sommes.
time, I started
les êtres
thinking
humains.
about what we are
Où est le
as
bon?
human beings.
Où est le mauvais?
Where is the
En
good
moi,
and where is the bad? Where is
me
the
suis-je
evil?
Demande
And
lorsque je tentais de jouer le
I
rôle
tried
noir.
to wonder
Je ne me
when
suis pas
I
senti
tried
aussi
the
sombre qui semblait
dark role.
lorsque
I didn't
je
feel
tentais
so dark
d'approcher
as
le
when
bleu.
I
Il
tried
reste
to
toujours
approach
quelques
the
saletés.
white. There's always
J'ai
some
toujours eu
dirt
besoin
left. So I required some tools to understand the world, to get to know myself. And that tool was for me the camera. And at the beginning, I believed that I could seize things in an objective way, but pictures were lying too. So I started taking subjective photographs. And while taking these subjective photographs, I could see the situation in a subjective way. And our world is like day and night. Sometimes, in fact, we are adorable beings, sometimes exasperating beings. And I asked myself the question at a bad moment, should we accept that someone should be shooted in the head? And later on, I took pictures of these men and women. And then I tried to recover this memory from my childhood, and I could smile at them. I could talk to them about things such as we would talk to a brother or a sister. It was the time to shake their hands in a very friendly way and not see their heads with that hole.
I wanted to share this text with you, this childhood recollection. Why did I decide to do that and link this with my work as a photographer? Because there is a clear link, a clear relationship between this and Albert Camus. I don't know how to speak to you about Camus when I'm not Camus. So one day, if I become Camus, if I transform into Camus, I'll be back to tell you about him. Thank you. Hi, good afternoon, please forgive me because I forgot my glasses. Just a sec. I'm getting old, and depending on the light, I can have some trouble reading. First of all, I'd like to say I'm really grateful to you for bringing me here. I cannot think of a better world to be in this time of my life. And I sincerely thank you for all your contributions, for everything you said so far. I'll do as in American films. I brought a very long text. I'm going to read part of it, but so whenever they just fold the paper, that means they are going to speak freely. Especially in the previous talk, as I was listening to it, I wondered, why am I so complicated? Why can't I just sit down here and listen and take in and accept things as they are sold? So I always tend to challenge everything. For instance, when I hear nobody should be killed, of course there is no justification for murder, but I always think, but they are killing for us. They are killing for us to be calm, and they are killing people that are coming to Europe, and they are being killed just to preserve our civilization. We are not killing ourselves, but we are letting others kill in our name. And of course, you cannot live like this because I'm always revolving around everything. This is the way I think. I can never stop, reflecting. I don't like to go to the personal because it seems an excuse, a pretext. When I hear, yes, in Camus, there was the matter of classes, the clash of classes or the fight of classes, but he got older, he changed class, social class. So not everything resides in the past. I'm going to tell you something that resides in the past, but please do not understand this as an excuse, but as an attempt to understand. My parents, especially my mother, had a daughter with brain paralysis. I wrote a very small book. This is the best I've ever written, and it's not false modesty. My mother wrote it through me. It's the smallest one, and it is about this story. And I was telling yesterday to Gao Bo, that for my whole childhood, during my childhood and when I was young, I always saw my mother writing letters. She was one of the founders of Amnesty International during Franco times, which was a difficult thing. She wrote letters to people that had been condemned to death penalty, to hundreds of countries, saying that nobody could be killed or sentenced to death. And I left, that is what I left, what I lived in my childhood. There was a humble woman, a mother, sending letters to Gambia, to Korea, to any country in the world, to Kansas, in the United States, so that somebody read that letter and decided to change his or her mind and not condemn, not kill that person. Sometimes I think that I'm so messed up because I just witnessed the most fantastic thing. So there were thousands of injustices throughout the world, in the world, but in the case of my mother, the brain paralysis of my sister could have been prevented. So I tried to write a short text. I'm going to cut it down and to remove some paragraphs. So if I'm not too consistent, please forgive me, because I'm just cutting. I try to imagine human beings, those that were, that are, and that will be. Nobody being, there's nobody. If I want to be precise, I'm nobody. I would like to be somebody, but I can't. I'm speaking from a place, a fictional space, to give precision to, but we can give precision to imaginary lives. I'm somebody without pressure, somebody that can look and want and not being looked. I'm the possibility of an uninterested interpretation. I've always attempted to diligently not laugh about human actions, not to cry about them, but also understand them. I just aspire to that. Understanding is encompassing, and imagination has its own limits too. I remember the years of the Second World War, the years before and after, the debates and discussions in France. Why are not today's discussions up to that level? Maybe right now an article, an interview, or a book, needs somebody to read it. There is a marasm, a chasm of voices that listen in a different way, and they utter the words also diagonally, always on the rushing. But this is not enough. Authority needs to be shared by many. So, what is the reason? Maybe we don't believe in institutions any longer. Truth is in being decadent. People say that we are living post-normal times. That term derives from science. We try to find a solution to uncertain facts, controversial or polemic facts. So maybe we could describe the current times as such, but we can expect that throughout our lives There will always be at least similar instances, but we need to speak about our times, about our lack of certainty. It's not exactly the same, although it seems similar to previous times. The same as people can be alike and different at the same time. Maybe some discussions in our times are up to the expectations. Well, some values have changed, others have disappeared, and we've gained in knowledge. Contrary to what one must assume, knowledge goes back, and certainty can be devoid of doubt and perplexity. Let's go back to the title, How to Define Freedom, today's freedom or the current freedom. How to define our brains, our genes, or the effect of being in a house, crushed by poverty, and the impact it has on the neocortex development. Free will affects us physically, our behaviors of everyday life. So we need to find a response on that environment. But this answer is an escape, because poverty, stress, just to follow on that example, they have their own causes or origins, root causes, and also triggers that limit freedom. First of all, we need to define freedom. Recall Dora in the Le Juste. We remember Camus speaking about moral and politics and the difficult reconciliation between freedom and justice, when everybody's freedom is the lack of freedom for others. So we recall his words when he spoke in 1956 at the Saint Etienne. In Saint Etienne, the oppressed people want to be devoid of hunger, but also to get rid of many other things. As the world becomes more and more complex, because the number of relationships increases exponentially, it is more and more difficult to say who are the owners, the great dominants. The responsibilities are diluted, and we don't know who to blame, because we cannot pretend we do not know. We do know that the calmness of many are the anguish of many more. The anguish, this anxiety, leads us to develop less, and people do not have the capability to flourish. I come back to Camus. Liberty insults work and separates it from culture, when it's made, first of all, of privileges. But freedom is not made, first of all, of privileges, but of duties. As we say, duties have to do with responsibility. It is responsibility, the consciousness, is it the duty to respond, to accept consequences of our acts. So we need to force people. Consciousness has a way to rationalize, also has room for self-deception. You might recall the beautiful story told by Canetti in his book entitled The Consciousness of Words. By chance, he found a note by an anonymous author dated on August 1939, 1 week before the outbreak of the Second World War. It stated, "There is nothing else to do. There's nothing we can do. But if I was a real writer, I should be able to avoid or to prevent war." At the beginning, he thought that this note was absurd. It was hollow rhetorics. Those are the same words that provoked, that led way to war. But he continued reflecting on this sentence or this text, a moment of defeat. He spoke about defeat when victory should be harvested. Should a writer be able to prevent war? So when thinking about this, he saw this was the confession about a great failure. And Canetti points this out. So, of course, in his despair, the author accuses himself and not the real people that were to blame. So the writer he says that should be responsible for everything that happens. Of course, we have a fake responsibility. Canetti reflects on the fact that we give more value to what we impose on ourselves compared to what is imposed on us from the outside. I conclude, he speaks about the need of people to impose themselves and about the responsibility on the words. I recall something beauty, this longing of attributing ourselves an imaginary responsibility. I say imaginary because it can also become real when it's accepted. For instance, those people that are drowning in the Mediterranean Sea, wars that are a consequence of so many things that are happening thousands of kilometers away. How can we assume the unwanted consequences of a certain action? How can we know they are unwanted consequences, but we accept them because they are far away, because we can't think about a way to avoid them? Kant speaks about a time where consequences were not so far away from reasons, the psychological process of moral self-deception. A first moment consisting on accepting the legality of our actions as guaranteed for their morality. He speaks about deception, of not inquiring, not taking, the effort to inquire. So I'll arrive at the end of this sentence. What does it mean to say each person? In his paper, The Artist and Its Time, and to simplify some conceptions of realistic art, Camus said the reality of every person, is not exactly where he or she lives, but also in other lives that shape his own life. The beloved ones, unknown people, powerful people, citizens, policemen, invisible colleagues from mines and workshop, diplomats, dictators, artists that create decisive myths for us, humble representatives, and so on and so forth. So this is a matter of chance. So we, as the mayor of St. Louis stated this morning, this implies that people are because of the decisions, or are or can't be because others' decisions prevent them from being what they want to be, what they aspire to be. So we need to wonder to ask ourselves some questions. What are they made of? What is missing there on those convictions? This sentence is inserted on one of Camus' reflections on art. The purpose of life is only to increase the quantity of responsibility and freedom of every person. I'll focus on art for some seconds, and I remember that he said in Sweden, how can we think that art is the declared enemy of all oppressive systems? How can't we not accept that artists were the first victims to tyranny in modern worlds and in the past? Camus always defended the right to dissent, to disagree, despite all the differences. So aware about the dead spot in my words. My task is about writing. I would like to agree with Camus, but I can't, because we think and speak with a willingness to understand, but we always miss something. I always say, so I say no. Artists are not always the first victims of modern tyrannies. They are the most well-known ones. Many thousands of others fall without us noticing or even being aware of their death or their passing away. Meanwhile, throughout the centuries, it is well known that culture with a capital C, not the culture we spoke about this morning, culture coexists with power, next to the power, and accompanies it. in permanent contradiction with small gestures that are thought to be heroic, but quite often they are very small. So we, people working on culture, we artists are well aware about that, because we are human beings and we self-deceive. I mean, we lie to us. So what we don't know suddenly emerges. Camus writes, "Mum, the truth is that despite all my love, I couldn't live with that blind patience, without sentences, without projects. I couldn't live my life ignoring, so I wandered around the world." That I loved people. To increase the degree of freedom and responsibility, we wondered for some moments how to increase our own, those of us that work with words. We impose on ourselves the responsibility for words, even though we are aware that this is not enough. Brecht wrote, "Unfortunately, we wanted to pave the way for kindness. We couldn't be kind." Unfortunately, I can say that the urgency we know, the crisis, different types of crisis, demands us not to be kind. At the same time, we need extraordinary attention that can only be found in kindness. We need kindness to lead us, to decide what to do. Miguel Ángel Moratunes said this morning, we wanted to resonate, to hear the drums of peace. For many years, I thought that precisely because of our profession, we give too much importance to stories, to words. I say that we need to give them the merit they deserve, or the attention they deserve. They are there, so we need to inhabit them to live in the world. Great structures and systems make responsibility on a new commodity, something that is included in the conditions of the service provided, be it an insurance or artificial intelligence. Nowadays, we can say that responsibility cannot be bought nor sold. On the contrary, we need to be free to exert freedom. How and where from? Maybe we need to ask ourselves how to oppose equality and freedom. We, both of us, have the same right to be free because we are the same. We cannot be more because more imposes limits and fences. In April, we have trees that provide seeds. I try to imagine human beings. The human beings, they were, they are, and they will be. Increasing the degree of responsibility and freedom of each person implies telling those stories in the plural. They do not belong just to the artists. They're always written against the willingness to oppress, in the search for justice. In the search for justice, as I said, the time we are, and that dissolves until we will cease to be. Thank you.
Bonjour.
Hello.
En fait, j'ai décidé de changer
I decided to change my intervention last minute.
Depuis ce matin. On a beaucoup parlé de
Since this morning, we've been talking a lot about loneliness. We've been talking about individuals and individualism.
Mon corps, en fait,
My body
parle, en fait,
is
au nom
talking
de différents jeux,
in the name of
au nom d'un collectif.
different
Et j'aimerais, en fait, vous
games
partager,
and
en fait,
in the name of a group of people, a community, and I'd like to talk to you about a collective experience that I started over 10 years ago
d'une revue
through a magazine that we
et qui s'appelle
founded.
Africada.
Its title is Africada. And before I arrived to this collective, before I talk about this collective experience, I'd like to talk in the name of this game first a bit, and then perhaps you will be able to understand why. For me, when we are in resistance, when we are in a struggle, when we have a need, a hope, and we are fighting for social transformation, without the sound we cannot achieve that. And the sound inhabits me. Transformation in the world of the art. Well, to begin with, I was coming from the world of cinema. I was doing forms of film objects instead of, rather than experimental cinema. And I've always wanted to do collective works. This is what really encourages me, motivates me. This is what makes me rethink and produce differently. I'm originary from Cameroon. I grew up in the Paris popular districts, and I grew up in the pop culture, and I grew up in the culture of the streets. So when you're not happy with a certain situation, you need to do by yourself. You need to take things in hand and transform things in a collective way. Please, could I have my video so that you can see it while I talk? I don't have to, but it is important for me to read a little text of this group of people I represent, because I always also speak on behalf of them, even though they're not here. But the work that I'm going to present here was thought and produced in a collective way, and the voices expressed through Africada are there to fill up a gap and between the colonial speeches and us. So to talk about us, to prove the understanding of discriminatory and post-colonial practices has no sense. The Africada group community is a rock of resistance with regards to the practices of legitimacy of power. We've tried with several issues to try and recreate a history of art that will be more inclusive, a history of the art where many Afro-descending artists have been deleted. So how to rethink ourselves, how to create or execute new fashions of creation. So a new history of art that will be inclusive, that will talk about us, and that will present the different practices that have are an outcome of our history. Africada considers that it was time to redefine the relationships between territory, idea, and artistic movement, that it's time to redefine new relations. And Africadi is a magazine offering a different perspective to the contemporary art sphere, going beyond borders and
Nous
the
sommes un
art
laboratoire
market.
qui se compose
We are a
de
laboratory
chercheurs
composed of
d'artistes
researchers,
et d'activistes
artists,
et de curateurs.
and activists, as
Un
well as
laboratoire qui
curators.
intègre la
It is
richesse
a
d'une
laboratory
scène
integrating the wealth
émergente
of
dont la
an
production
emerging
mérite
artistic
visibilité et réflexion.
panorama
La revue est un
for
espace esthétique
reflection.
et éthique
It is a
face aux enjeux
static
majeurs de la
and
mondialisation.
ethical space facing the great challenges of globalization. We want to
Au-delà des géographies,
carry out a
des
global
politiques
reflection beyond the geographies and
culturelles. Il révèle
political cultures.
à la conscience du monde l'artiste contemporain,
The
et sa
magazine is
modernité.
showing to the world
L'approche de l'histoire de l'art
contemporary
contemporain
artists
car il est
and
temps pour nous
African artists,
d'être
because it
acteurs
is time
notre
for
histoire.
us to be the players of our history.
en contribuant
It
ainsi
is
à la réinventation,
time
à la
to contribute to
réinvention des idées.
to the reinvention of ideas and artistic
Cette revue est
spaces.
pour nous un acte
Creating
politique.
this magazine is for us a
Pour nous, il a toujours été
political
important d'être
action,
maître de son histoire,
because for us it has always been very important to be owners of our
Pour
history
nous, on pense la revue, comme
and
un
be able
espace
to
de
write
démonstration,
our own history. For us it is a space of demonstration,
où, une diaspora
of
n'a pas son propre musée,
proofs.
n'a pas ses propres espaces d'expression. Donc pour nous, quand on a pensé en
For
fait
us, when we
cette
thought
revue-là,
about this magazine and about creating it, this space
mais c'est
became
aussi
a
une revue,
space
en
of
fait, un espace
resistance,
de
but
guérison.
also a space
Prendre
of
soin
for
de nos
healing and taking care
prendre
of
soin, en
our
fait,
narratives,
des histoires
of
afin de les
stories,
réparer,
so that we
des
can
histoires qui ont
repair
été,
ourselves,
invisibilisées,
stories that have
des
been
histoires qui ont été
invisibilized,
effacées,
that
et
had
comment,
been
en fait,
deleted,
mettre dans la lumière
and
les voix
how
silencieuses.
to
Et,
give light to silenced
et à chaque
voices.
fois, moi, en tant que
And
curatrice,
as a curator,
j'essaye en fait
I always try.
je m'intéresse beaucoup en fait au profil
Well,
d'artistes
I must
chercheurs.
say that I'm very much
Pourquoi?
interested by the profile of an artist researcher,
Ce qui m'intéresse,
because
c'est comment en fait
I find it very interesting
à partir d'une revue
to
où,
see
on
how,
a mis en place un
through
concept
a
qu'on a
magazine
appelé,
where we
l'acte
implemented
éditorial live,
the
c'est-à-dire
concept
que
of act
pour,
editorial
chaque,
life.
sortie du numéro,
So this means
on
that
expose en fait
every
le
time there's a
contenu,
new
en fait,
issue, the
dans,
content is
différents espaces.
exhibited
Comment exposer
in
la
different
conscience sous cette forme?
spaces. How can we
C'est des problématiques
show
qui nous intéressent.
the
c'est pour ça aussi
thoughts
qu'on s'intéresse,
in
en fait,
different
aux
under different shapes? This is what we are interested by, and this is why this profile of artist and researcher
un événement
is
qu'on
interesting
produit,
for
en
us.
fait,
We also
pendant la Biennale de
carry out
Dakar.
an event
Je pourrais dire,
during
on a
the
appelé ça
Dakar
l'Africaine Art Book Fair, mais en fait, c'est pas du tout
Biennale.
une foire.
It's
plutôt une
not
anti-foire.
a fair,
C'est un projet
it's an
artistique
anti-fair,
qu'on produit en fait
and it is
pendant la
something
Biennale de
that
Dakar.
we
Et en
produce
fait,
during
cette
the
plateforme a pour objectif en fait d'accompagner, d'aider.
biennial. Well, the idea is that we have a platform that is there and that is going to accompany artists from the continent in order to motivate them, encourage them to produce, so that the editorial publishing houses will publish catalogs of African artists. It's also a way of gathering, and the issue of language is a barrier for some people. But the artistic value for me, the visual language, has always been for me a language that allows us to go beyond borders. And in this work that we carry out during the Dakar Biennial with the independent publishing houses that we invite every year, we try to reflect about alternative ways for the circulation of publications. We know it's very difficult in the continent, because
de le retrouver, par exemple, au Sénégal.
if publications in South African in English are difficult to find in Senegal or Morocco. And also we're talking about small publishing houses, so we don't want to be work with Amazon.
De mettre en place, c'est quand on se retrouve tous les 2 ans.
So every 2 years, when we meet, we exchange our publications. For example, when I'm invited to go to book exhibitions in the field of art, I will bring publications from publishing houses that cannot travel there.
C'est-à-dire que, comment vous dire ça?
How can I explain this? The topic of the circulation of the thinking. So what is written in the north is easily found in southern territories, but what is written in the south will find many difficulties to actually be read in the north. And I'm saying this because I am also co-director of art fair with event. The idea was to raise the awareness of art publishing houses, because I had seen that there were no publishing houses from the south in the fairs that we organized. So this was during COVID, and I was the curator, and I invited independent publishing houses from the African continent. This project could not actually take place because of COVID, but we decided to launch a publication in spite of everything, as if it was a fair. Because I really enjoy working with books as a medium, as a support. And I also like working with the publishing world. And for me, this is a space of exhibition. It's a wonderful space to be able to reinvent oneself, so to present new narratives and to hear voices, to listen to voices that we rarely hear. In the fair we organized this year, we invited several publishing houses that participated to that publication, and each publishing house had its own space in the publication to express themselves. And for us, this was a way of, showing how to go from a physical space, so a fair or an exhibition, and how we see this physical space transform itself into a space of publication. So we invited about 20 publishers, and in spite of the fact that we were covering all their expenses, the problem of visas was there. Even though with the letters of invitation, everything was done, and all the expenses being covered and everything. Well, in spite of everything, quite a few of them couldn't get the visa, even though we had received the money from the Minister for Foreign Affairs. We had received the money, the funds from the German Minister for Foreign Affairs. So it is actually the embassy of the African countries that doesn't allow the publishers to travel. So we need to think about how the kind of thoughts and ideas that are allowed to circulate and travel. And these are some of the topics on which we reflect in our group Africada. Now I'd like to talk to you about project that I have just launched. We've got the theory and the project, or the practice, sorry. So whenever we have a project that we want to carry out, we always try to execute it. And for us, it is the way of seeing how can these ideas can reach the society, to see what works and what doesn't. And I am currently working in the laboratory of Aubenvilliers. I was invited by Paula Valero, a Spanish artist, who's been working for 5 years in Rosa Luxemburg's project of the resistance herbier. And this has been done with several women from Valencia, Madrid in Spain, but also some countries in Latin America. And I had some experience in the topics of colonization that she didn't have. So the idea was to create a genealogy. So the Aubervilliers laboratory has a vegetable garden where many groups of women from the community will come to work with, what they will sow and also participate with the pollination. Sometimes they go back to their countries of origin and they bring seeds back and they plant them, sow them in this vegetable garden, which is something sort of incredible now, with a very incredible story too, because for me it is the women taking care of life, of living things. And I started working with them on this project. The project is based on, well, the idea of the project is to try and meet different vegetable gardens that exist in the Aubervilliers city and also in the laboratory of Aubervilliers, and find the plants, well, these bad weeds, the weeds that are weeds, well, for some, but not for everyone. These are very resisting plants that live in incredible places like polluted soils and concrete, and they can sprout there. And the idea is to work with these resistant plants that we call weeds and link them to the narratives coming from these women that the women bring, and linked to women that inspired them, figures that were important for them and that allowed them to become who they are today, and who are very resisting women. So how to link those women with these resisting plants, these weeds. And that's the idea of the project. Also, we must, well, I'd like to say that in this group of women, some of them are illiterate and don't know how to read or write. And with my friend Paola, this is a Spanish artist, we've imagined some workshops to work with sort of sheets that will allow us to create this bond, this link between the women and the weeds. So she's going to do, for example, a drawing workshop where they're going to take pictures of the plants and then she will teach them how to draw. And this is another form of temporality. We've talked about the concept of time and how we can take some time for ourselves in this world where everything is so fast, where the rhythms are so fast. And also this idea of how artists can can cross this border of those who know and those who don't. So, in fact, these women have knowledge about plants that I don't have at all. So, it's interesting to see how, together with the artist, we are going to be able to create this herbarium, resisting herbarium that didn't exist before. And this is what I wanted to tell you about. This sharing of knowledge is always very important. Wherever we come from, we all have forms of knowledge that should be shared and that can be enriched mutually. Thank you.
Si alguna conversación entre de lo que habéis dicho sugiere algo entre vosotros o si preferís que abramos.
What do you prefer? Would you like to discuss among you, taking into account what the three of you have said, or would you like to open this up to the audience? Pascale, I have a question for you. So, my question is the following. I found it very interesting, everything you said about working with art from a collective point of view, in a collective way. Yes, can you hear me? Yes, I will start again. So I was very much interested about what you said about art and working in art in a collective way. And one of the main problems in this country, in Spain, is about the power of circulation or dissemination. Some different types of speeches will be disseminated, but some of those discourses are heard by 50 people and others are heard by 50 million people. So it's very difficult to go against these trends in terms of power of dissemination. So I was wondering if the fact of working with the Africada group increases that power of dissemination, or perhaps it's quite the opposite, because sometimes people are looking for the actual individual they would like to invite. We are aware of the fact that we are a niche, and the way in which we work, well, we work like ants. For example, we've recently published this issue, racism and discrimination in the School of Art. And it's been nearly 1 year and a half before we published it. And well, the way in which we work, and also we have a methodology for the production of common things. So this means that every time we want to do something together, we set up a research group with. So there's the core of the group, but then for each of the themes we're going to invite specific individuals. So situated writing is something that we want to advocate for and that we want to highlight. So in this last issue, we worked with the students in School of Art who had been suffering from racial discrimination. And for us, well, it was the first time where we've really encountered so many difficulties to actually publish this issue. Very few school directors who were willing to write and publish an article with us. Only one supported us. Very few professors or teachers wanted to contribute because they said that that had nothing to do with them. So we've actually worked very much with the students. And this issue, therefore, is a proposal at our very humble scale, very small scale, and in it you will find proposals for solutions to fight against problems related to discrimination. For example, we found out that many of the students that worked with us in this issue, well, had problems related to content, issues related to the memory, new artistic practices that they tried to bring into the very conservative school of art. For example, for a year, I was a professor in the School of Beaux-Arts in La Réunion, and, well, you can do that without hearing anything about artists, Rayonnais artists. So how can you, if you are a young Rayonnais artist, think about your own future, envisage a possible future for you if there are no artists coming from your homeland as references? Well, there are more and more artists and students in the School of Arts that come from immigration, so they bring in those topics, also narratives coming from their parents, and we see that professors don't have any tools to accompany the works of those students. We also have a project which is the augmented library, where we are creating a history of art that will be more inclusive, and we are working with students so that there will be more monographics on artists coming from southern territories. So also there will be more books by post-colonial studies thinkers, everything that is not already in those libraries in schools of arts. So it's interesting that they already had their own libraries, but we merged ours too, so that we would have a more inclusive library, including all these new voices that have been silenced during many years. And for me, it's very interesting that, well, we started this about 4 or 5 years ago to work in the space of the library, and it's a sort of a refuge space. And then it is also an exhibition space, because I'm interested by those spaces of knowledge that are so sacred, and how to desacralize the knowledge so that it will be more accessible to a greater number of people. And we also had a project in the library of the Pompidou Center with another group, and with Antoine Javet, who's the curator and who is living in South Africa, and he's been experimenting in the space of libraries. And 10 years ago already, in the Cape Town library, they saw that some of the students couldn't go to this library, and in this library there were only white authors. So it was very interesting to see that the only black people who had the right to go into the library were clean ladies and guards, security guards. And the students gave them the list of books they required, and, well, they gave that to the safeguards, and there were also stickers because the clean ladies didn't always know how to read. And then when the cleaning ladies came, they would take the books with the stickers on them, and the students would make photocopies of the books, and then the clean ladies will bring the books back in. And the Chimeron-Bois library is composed of only black authors, and their project is to have this library infiltrated in the Cape Town Library. And this project has been carried out in Lagos, San Francisco, and several other cities. And when they came to Paris in 2020, we worked with 8 researchers for a year and a half, and we were reading the Pompidou Center's library, and we saw that the people going to this library, it was not only students, and that was also very interesting for us to see also how to transform this library, that is a great place of knowledge, into a different kind of space. There were a lot of homeless people coming to the library during the opening hours in the morning. And they went there because it's warm inside, so that they could have some rest. And also we saw that there were migrants that were coming because they could learn different languages. You could take headsets, and there are TVs and programs, and they can learn French. Or also they can have access to news from their own countries. So we saw that there were different types of audiences going to the library, and for different reasons. They were going there for different reasons. So we've created a sort of installation, because the curator, Anthony Jevet, doesn't really like the word exhibition, because that represents the cover of the book, but the installation is what is inside the space. So these are different forms of experience that I like to work on, and we try to find different forms to exhibit thinking.
J'avais une question pour Bo.
I have a question for you. That has to do with your work, your photographic work, because that means, or that way of, a lot is being said about representation, how we represent bodies. So in your work, I can see that bodies are very much present. So they take a very important role. So my question is, when you work with as an artist, how do you relate with those bodies? To me, bodies and portraits are two different things. You asked me the question about how I relate in my work with bodies, me and bodies. Well, bodies are, a topic on their own. So it could be a whole subject matter, and we could be talking about it for a long time, for ages. Quite often in my everyday work, I express with my body. It can be a female or male body, or sometimes with my own body. They are ways of expressing myself. I didn't understand very well why you asked me this question about how I relate to bodies. What do you want to know exactly? Because, yes, well, in fact, the photography as a means, as I say, a channel or a way to provide an image. And we also have types of photographies where the artist establishes a link, a relationship, or a bond with a character, with the main character that is being represented on the picture. That is what I meant. Okay. I always felt very comfortable with bodies, human bodies in front of me. I always feel at ease. Bodies. When I never take pictures of bodies where when I'm not feeling at ease or comfortable in front of them. All bodies are protected by laws. Therefore, I don't know any longer whether I have the right, I'm entitled or not to take pictures. Maybe a judge will come and say you didn't write or sign an agreement, and that will lead to problems, to issues, legal issues. So I'm taking less and less pictures of bodies, of human bodies. So I rather, photograph friends, people I know. But as I said, I have many, many pictures to a body of work that is very big, so I don't need to take many more. I don't know whether I replied to your question precisely. Thank you. Do you mind if we open the floor to the attendants, to the audience? It's time for the audience to ask questions or make the remarks or comments. Hello?
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you very much, the three of you, for your highly interesting presentations. My question is for Mr. Gao Bo. When you started speaking today, you used your mother tongue, and later on you said you felt alone, you felt in solitude. I cannot tell you how lonely I felt, because I thought, that person is alone, frustrated. I felt absolutely lonely. I thought, oh, there is no interpreter for Chinese. This is a joke. I feel as isolated as he feels now for half an hour. Okay, your childhood recollections impressed me enormously. So I wondered whether this triviality, this banalization of evil due to the political regime at that time, where children went to celebrate the execution, the killing of citizens, even with great joy, because they were running up and down, moving all the time. I'd like to know at what time in your life, if you can tell us, let us know, you accepted and came to terms with that recollection, with that memory, and whether photographies help you make peace with your own past, with your own recollections and memories, because the title is to increase the degree of responsibility and freedom of a person. You lacked both freedom and responsibility when you were a child. So maybe thanks to photography, or maybe photography was a means to escape. No, it helped. Yeah. Thank you very much for your question. I'll try to be to reply in the most appropriate way. Photography is it's a matter, a means or tool I've used to give expression to my feelings and thoughts. And by using this language, I feel often quite restricted or limited. And you will wonder why. Well, that is because, I don't know, whether I could escape those many memories. You mentioned them, those recollections. My attempt, what I tried to do, or perhaps I was doing it unconsciously. I don't know why in my works I always managed to find beauty in the wounds. Because that beauty has been provided by our society, and it's been imposed as such, but I still don't believe in it, and I thought that cannot be. There has to be another way. I always searching for something that is more obvious, more evident, if you allow me to say so. So I always try to go deeper to the essence. But that beauty that was covering my eyes, that was blinding me, prevented me from seeing clearly. That is why I started my presentation by speaking about that black light, that halo of black light. It doesn't exist as such. Obviously, we are always placed under the light, white light, and we try to escape from darkness, from dusk, from shadows, to flee from shadows. But that is my story. So if I do not try to heal those wounds, the wounds of what I had to go through in my early life, I mean, I need to somehow make progress and keep going. Because the more progress I make, the more I realize I can be wrong. And maybe sometimes we make decisions that lead us to disaster. So that's why I thought that I must conclude this part, completely cure and heal those wounds, so that I can follow my way, keep on, making progress. So first of all, I hope that through my work I could come closer to this bright light I feel so, I so much long for.
Thank you all. Really enjoyed your talks. My question is to Pascale. I'm gonna wait. Okay, so in your collective working to decolonize narratives about the African continent, I'm really interested to learn more about your observations and thoughts about how artists are tackling this topic, how they're changing the narratives within the African context, but also how these narratives, these alternative narratives, are being received in Europe. I would love to hear your thoughts more about that.
Ouais, c'est une longue, c'est une
question
elle n'est pas évidente à répondre.
It's not that obvious, not straightforward, because it's a whole movement, so there is not short and clear answer. We could speak about a deconstruction movement. First of all, we need to dismantle those stories, to deconstruct and delocalize also, or to, it's another way of appropriating those narratives, learning to do things differently, learning to teach people in a different way too. So whenever we create these spaces, we are very careful of, about the narratives and the ways of expression that are taking place. To me, all these, we tackle all those topics, and many artists are following that way, some curators too, not only them. And I think That is why when I said that I'm very much interested in the profile or types of artist researchers at the same time, they, based on post-colonial thinkers, they translate them applying a very artistic perspective or angle. And I have the impression that this artistic language, at least, well, reaches the audiences in a more easily, thus enabling understanding. This way we understand better the difficulties we face in today's world, and somehow we can heal some wounds. In my opinion, writing is really a means to repair, to heal wounds that were invisible or even they were erased. So this new stream, this new movement, is rewriting and retelling that story, so that is much closer to reality. There are so many artists. For instance, I worked at the Bahai colony. This is a space created by the Franco-Nigerian artist Bahetian. This space was up and running for 3 years. It was an experimentation lab, and the great thinkers visited it, artists, activists, etc. So in that environment, it was a breeding ground for many people coming from deprived neighborhoods, curators, or even students from the political sciences school. So that made me see that we could mingle, get together, and create something new. And sometimes it's difficult to find those spaces of diversity where people learn to listen to each other. So we need to relearn to listen. So to me, those spaces, and I work quite a lot with many institutions or museums. In the past, they were toxic environments for me. And my friends asked me, why do you keep on accepting working on those spaces? Because they are harming you. But I always replied that there was a way we could appropriate them in a different way. We should occupy those spaces too. It's also important. Ultimately, I have an interest on creating new spaces, novel spaces, because it's important. It's utterly impossible to decolonize museums. They are completely out of time. So I'd rather invest my efforts and energy in spaces that will be able to care and to repair and to provide something to communities I'm interested in. Thank you so much. Well, following upon that issue about decolonizing imaginaries and knowledge, I would like to present two elements for thought, and I'd like to know your opinion. The first one is I always work on the basis of the ethics of justice. Camus was so keen on, so I question in our duty for restoration, how can we find a balance, the right balance? Because when you just focus on repairing, we could, lose balance. So only by finding the right balance can we promote dialogue and find the right compass to what Edouard Desand called the need lateralize the universe. That is, I'm not only repairing to reconstruct a narrative based on the local only, but also work to decentralize everything that is universal. So based on that, and this leads me to the second thought, the second reflection, delocalization, and I'll explain myself. We need to destroy the walls, the fences, and the hurdles of different sciences. So, of course, we spoke about orality, oral stories, but maybe there is a critical aspect that needs to be dealt with. You spoke about toxic institutions. We need to decolonize the production places, that is, institutions that are at the heart of the empires. I mean, and I'll give my critical opinion, I'm from Morocco, so it's an older, a former colony and an empire at the same time. My main question is, how can we decolonize production institutions? Otherwise, as somebody pointed out, we will be restricted to the margins, to niches. Of course, we will manage to achieve things, but we need to really open up and decolonize the upper spheres, because they own the narrative nowadays about how to represent the world. Okay, I'll start with the reparation or restoration topic. I'd like to say that for many years I lived in an ill body. My body was ill because, I'm saying this because I studied in France, and therefore I had the opportunity, or I was forced to read thinkers and philosophers, and I never found myself, my identity in their narratives, in their stories. So I always had that urge, that need to find restoration and repair. And that can only be possible by decolonizing our bodies, our physical identities, and the only way forward is to heal, to be aware, to take consciousness that somehow we are ill, and we need to find the means and tools to heal, to repair ourselves, and so as to be capable to encounter others, to come closer to others, to try or attempt to discover. Because if you lack the effort, the strength, the urge, the strength, there is no way of sharing on equal terms. So that is why I spoke about the need to repair my body, the bodies of my community, of my collective, so of healing, so as to, be conscious and take awareness. If we really want to decolonize imaginaries. As far as decolonizing institutions is concerned, I might have a more pessimistic view for the mere fact that I struggled for many, many years to change the world. I realized that I was living in a kind of utopia, that I was wrong, that the world was a different one. And I'm speaking more about contemporary art. I'm very much into it. I try to change things in museums. So after that time, I came to the realization that it is impossible to decolonize those upper spheres, those institutions, public institutions, because change is only possible from applying a bottom-up perspective. That is, we need to educate, to train our children. For instance, the Louvre School, I can think of an example, I'm not giving the name of the person. They are training the future specialists, experts, that will work at museums. But they do not teach anything about African contemporary art. They teach about classical African art, but nothing about the modern art. I mean, I'm speaking about the Louvre. So there are some so-called specialists that have more or less deep knowledge about this topic. So of African they contribute to creating African collections. But they never studied. Those curators in charge of making up collections, how can, feel themselves capable of doing that job? And there lies the paradox nowadays, where I think there is so much work to do. So we should start just from the very bottom. And to answer to you, it wasn't a question, but you made a remark that we need to avoid becoming or working just on the margins, on niches. To me, this is very interesting, and that is why we work so much with young people, with children, because they will be curators in the future, and they will be the ones to transform our societies. It will be up to them. So this is why I always try to spend time and work with them, conveying the message, just to achieve that goal. How could I say that? I'm training soldiers. The Africada magazine is a kind of alternative school, in the sense that, as there are not many art schools teaching contemporary African art, there are many students that that are writing their doctoral thesis, the PhD thesis, and we support them. We provide some support so that those young artists will, in turn, be able to change or create new institutions that are more inclusive. Thank you so much to the three speakers, for each in your own style, in your way. You managed to convey the message of the need to heal your wounds, to repair your wounds, and you provided, you mentioned some tools and means, instruments. Many of your words, Belén, moved me. And I vibrated with your lucidity, your contradictions, when you spoke about your fragility, and that when Gao Bo presented his nobleness and how he spoke about those people that provide their body, and you work more alone on your own. And Pascale spoke about her work with collectives, with groups. So thanks again to the three of you for your contributions. So we need 5 minutes to prepare the stage for our last session, our last two speakers, Ms. Asadu and Ms. Yobet. So 5 minutes.